If you use the internet on a daily basis, and chances are you do, you probably don't put much thought into cybersecurity. You know, your network connections, the pages you visit, the files you download. You should be thinking about these all the time. Welcome to And Security for All. Your host is Kim Hakem. We're here to help you understand, in general terms, how and why your cybersecurity should be kept in check. Now, here is Kim Hakem.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. I haven't seen everyone for almost a month with the holidays. I'm Kim Hakem, your host. If this is your first time tuning into the show, welcome. Welcome to another episode of And Security for All. We had such a great lineup of speakers in 2021. If you missed any of our speakers, please go check us out on Voice America on the Business Network. And any place you like to listen to your podcast, you will find Voice America, and you can find And Security for All. So we are here in 2022. Last year seemed to fly like every year does, but all my colleagues and friends in the cybersecurity industry had a very nice holiday gift. They had Log4j. 2020, we wrapped up with SolarWinds, and now all the security teams are out there bogged down with the Log4j issues. My hats are off to all the hard workers out there fighting the continued fight of cybercrime, breaches, hacks, you name it. We're actually going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about zero trust, how to make real progress in months, not years. Zero trust is such a overwhelming word we see on hashtags all over the place. And let's go back to the basics and talk about, how do we wrap our head around this, and how do we, just really go back to zero trust? What's that mean? We're going to discuss tips, tricks, lessons learned, and what to avoid. But before I invite my guest in today, and I have two guests today, I wanted to update everyone on what's going on in the FutureCon world. For those of you that may be new listeners, FutureCon puts on cybersecurity conferences all throughout North America. Everything that we're going to do in 2022 is in a hybrid mode. We have roughly about 28 conferences that will be touring throughout North America. We have a few virtuals out there, but we're really trying to move away from virtual, and we want to get back to live events. The good news is our live events will always stream, and we will always have virtual attendees. The bad news is that we're still trying to get those people that don't want to leave their house to come out and see us again. We're actually going to be in Dallas on January 20th. And my two guests here today, Banyan Security, they are going to be a sponsor of that event today. We have so many industry cyber security leaders that are doing keynote. Well, first of all, that event in Dallas, we have some of the best speakers in Dallas that are going to be speaking at that event. So if you want to check out that event, please go to our website at futureconevents.com, and we would love to see you live or virtual. But one thing that we launched right in we started going back to live events around August of 2021. And it's definitely been a struggle getting people to come back out, but people are starting to come back out. And one thing we've decided to do over the next year is celebrate all those hardworking cybersecurity professionals in the industry who are working hard, and they probably feel like they're never getting acknowledged. So each of our events, we're going to be honoring about 30 individuals in each market with a special award and a cocktail reception. And that cocktail reception will go out to all of our cybersecurity attendees that are going to be at each event. We're super excited about that. We really want to try to acknowledge those unsung heroes really that are out there working hard every day. So if anyone's listening to this and you have somebody in the industry that you think should be nominated for someone that goes above and beyond doing extra, their extra work in the industry, please message us because we've been taking nominations for the past year. So today I have two great guests today. I have Den Jones. He brings a unique mix of leadership and IT implementation experience to Banyan Security as their CSO, which is their Chief Security Officer. And I have Carlos Martinez is the Banyan Security Director of Solutions Architecture. Both of these guys came from Cisco, and prior to that, they came from Adobe. So I am excited to welcome my guests today. Welcome, Dan and Carlos.
Hey, Kim. Thanks very much for having us, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Thanks for being here. So guys, tell me, since you were both at Adobe, you were both at Cisco, and now you're both here at Banyan. One of you guys want to take the lead on how that happened and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I can open, and then Carlos can add the fun stuff. So I was lucky enough to work in Adobe with great careers, both at Adobe and at Cisco, two awesome companies. I ran enterprise security in Adobe, and then I left Adobe to join Cisco in the IT organization where I ran enterprise security there. And in both cases, responsible for a lot of the identity and access management stuff, a lot of workforce security. And then one of the big things in both companies was our organization. We were responsible for the Zero Trust implementation and delivering Zero Trust, as you said earlier, in months, not years. And, those were two really exciting programs for both companies.
Yeah, and I've been focused, right? I'm a practitioner at heart. So I was a security engineer at Adobe, really was excited to hear about this whole new initiative around Zero Trust and what it could do, not only from a security perspective, but how it could enable our workforce, and really was a big part of that rollout there. And when I heard Dan was at Cisco, I was like, well, you guys are working, Cisco's working on a similar initiative. So was excited to be part of that. So it's been, I guess we're a package deal at this point, but no, not so much. It's been exciting though.
Yeah.
Well, go
sorry,
ahead.
Kim, I was just going to say, but the move to Banyan was a really interesting one. So during our time in Adobe, we became a Banyan customer. We got to know the Banyan team. We loved the product and their strategy and what they've been working on. So as they've matured and evolved over the years, we were speaking with the co-founders, and they asked us if we wanted to join Banyan in the crusade. Zero Trust, as you said, it's a big marketing term. There's not many people out in the world who have actually got experience of deploying Zero Trust, especially in that rapid fashion. And we were just super excited to join, what I think of as a company that's uniquely placed in the industry, and a company that has a very compelling story and solution. So for us, we had great confidence. I mean, look, you don't leave a company like Cisco, which is an excellent company, to join a company like Banyan without having some faith in the future of Banyan and what Banyan's delivering in the industry. So for us, it was not a leap of faith. It was a leap of real enthusiasm and enjoyment of joining such a young, future thinking team.
It's such an interesting, industry that we live in because, I, just like you, have a million competitors out there that do, the same thing as I do. Fortunately, I've been in the industry 20 plus years and I had a different company I founded. And so I think that's the same thing with Banyan and all these new companies that are, coming to life, is that we have so many great leaders in the industry that are coming from companies like Cisco and, all those other great companies out there, and Kaspersky, and so many of them that have taken the leadership teams and then developed these companies like Banyan. So I don't know a lot about the history of your founders, but is that the case? Where did your founders come from?
I don't know, Carlos, you want to jump in on that one?
So yeah, Giant, I can tell you that, and they all come from deep technical backgrounds, right? Where I can tell you our CEO Giant comes from VMware, where he was a big part of some of the initial technology out there, and was one of the mentors, was a co-founder, and so they have deep technical networking knowledge. The product has actually sort of have moved or evolved from service to service to more of a focus on user to service. But yeah, they come from their Stanford grads, and just come from the background of just networking expertise, some identity chops, and yeah, it all sort of comes together, because with this particular zero trust network access solution that Banyan provides, you need a little bit of that versatility, right, of an endpoint component to proxy solution, identity aware proxy, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all come together.
So before we dive into zero trust and talk about some of these things we're going to talk about today, I do want to remind you guys that the listeners on And Security for All, not all of them are super technical like you guys are. So there may be moments that I'll ask you to break that down a little bit for us so they can understand what we're talking about. But I saw in your bio, Den, there was a little fun fact in there. So I have to ask you, it said Den released music when it was on vinyl, and I definitely miss vinyl, but it says, what was that? So tell us, Dan.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm glad you said, not everyone's super technical, because I always confess I'm not super technical. That's why Carlos is here. So on the vinyl front, the music front, I still am involved in music. I write and release and produce music under the name Urban Punks.
Oh.
It's all electronic stuff. I've got a lot of influences over the years from the 1980s synth pop bands and things of that nature. But I collect vinyl. I'm a huge vinyl fan, and I'll collect everything. I go to antique stores and I find old Beatles stuff, Bob Dylan, The Doors, anything really that's not in my collection or that I think isn't in the collection. So yeah, I'm a big vinyl fan, and I did release music. The first record I released was in 1994, and I was a young 22-year-old kid going around the rave scene, playing gigs and stuff like that, which was a very fascinating experience, which is probably good for another podcast, I guess.
I know I have so many questions, and I don't want to go off there, but I do have one question, because I haven't actually heard a vinyl record on a radio player, like a whatever you call them. I mean, I grew up listening to that. So what's that sound like? I guess it's high tech enough now because they've redeveloped all that stuff. Is that good sound coming out of that?
Well, it's good sound in my studio because I've got really expensive speakers for my music production, but I actually still use the original Technics turntables that were built, back in the 80s and 90s and stuff. So I'm getting that, the little hiss and the crackle and all those things coming through, which is really, for me, it's part of the authenticity of having, vinyl as opposed to just streaming music. Otherwise Spotify, is cool. So I use that, but nothing beats putting on some vinyl.
That's awesome. Maybe I'll have a new hobby this year, but I doubt I'm going to have time, but that would be a fun one. So anyway, let's go talk about zero trust. And, so much, you see hashtags all over the place, zero trust, zero trust, zero trust. So, let's just kind of start down, let's downscale it a little bit, and let's talk about what zero trust is. And zero trust, one of the things you said is, how can you turn an organization into a place where you can implement zero trust in a month and not years. So I would like to hear from you guys, and you guys can choose whoever to start. How does a company, say it's not even an enterprise level company, say it's a company with 500 to 1,000 employees, what would your advice be in training all of the folks in the corporation how to wrap their hands around zero trust?
So yeah, if you don't mind, I'll start, and then Carlos can throw in some color here. So let's define zero trust, right? So first of all, I have no trust that when you get 20 people in a room, they'll all have the same thoughts on what zero trust is. So I think that for me is the opener, right? And in our context, I think of zero trust, and you can have service to service, but for now, let's focus on users accessing applications and services. And the industry traditionally always went along the lines of, we're going to use a username and password that will help us understand who you are. And if you're going to access resources on the inside of our network, you're going to go through a VPN. And in both cases, the experience in doing so, and even the security posture in doing so, it's not exactly evolved much over many years. If you look at the last 15 years, it hasn't really evolved much. We introduced things like multi-factor as part of the identity stack, the authentication piece. And then from a VPN thing, there is some posture check that you might do during a VPN. But as a user experience goes, it's not really evolved, and it's certainly cumbersome and clunky. So if you can think of it, let's take the authentication step and make that simpler, a better user experience. Let's remove the need for the user to VPN in, and make it easier for them to access those internal apps and services. And then very importantly, let's include the posture check of the device, because I might have 5 devices and they all may be at a varying level of security posture. Some of them might not be patched, some of them might be managed, some of them may not, some may not have any endpoint software. And then at the end of the day, you could have one device compromised, but your other 4 not compromised. So how we handle that as part of that access is the thing that I think that has really evolved more and more over the years as zero trust has become more mature. So taking the user context and the device context as part of that access and enabling a smoother access into those apps and services is a huge part of it. And Carlos, do you want to add any more there?
I mean, in a nutshell, from a user to service perspective, that's on point, right? And it's being granular in providing that least privileged access to those resources, and validating on a per app basis, right? So once you establish that for accessing a specific resource, you're doing that for the next attempt to access another resource, and that's where some of the traditional methods like VPN just fall short, right? You validate once, or you ensure that the user is who they say they are, and they now have full access to move around laterally. So yeah, with zero trust, yes, and a lot of us are familiar about the security benefits that come with it, and as Den pointed out, once you start establishing that user and device trust, you're able to do some really exciting things. At least I find them exciting, where you can improve that experience for accessing resources. You move away from the premise that you have to be part of a network segment to access these resources, and now because you are now adding other layers of security, you're able to make these resources available without having to connect to your network via VPN or anything. So you can provide a more, I like to say, frictionless method of access. You're also able to reduce the number of times you're prompting a user for their credentials, because you have other means to sort of verify, again, establish that user and device trust. So big user experience benefits, including those security benefits that many of us are aware of from a zero trust network perspective.
So we spend so much time on the show, and we read so much about the news, about all the bad things that have been happening in the industry, because they happen every day. So let's talk about some of the highlights of what you're seeing when people are implementing zero trust in a company's security posture. Give us some examples of what you've seen from bad to good, and by by following your advice, can you give us some good examples?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Ben, if you want to jump in.
Oh,
first.
you jump in first, then you go.
Yeah, so I'd say, you know, one of and we, by the way, you know, I've had the pleasure of talking to a lot of like my peers in the industry, right? Practitioners that have gone out and have either begun to research, getting started in their journey, or are well into their journey, and you know, one of the biggest things is that a certain team or engineer or manager will go off and try to boil the ocean. They'll develop a plan and try to deploy this across their organization. And the reality is, and as Dan pointed out earlier, once you start introducing this notion that device health matters in order to gain access, you'll start to discover that, hey, some of my devices that I didn't know, they were in a degraded state, or this or that, and it may raise some headaches or cause some unforeseen issues. And so really for us, one of the big tips that we give is like, find a specific use case and start there, and slowly, as you gain that experience, expand and iterate. And so that's one of the things is, you know, really starting finding that use case. And you know, in our previous role, one of the use cases that we found was, you know, just that acquisition use case. New users that had to access certain resources, and we had to provide a method to do that. Now, traditionally, you had to go and build infrastructure and connect that infrastructure to the company. And with zero trust network access, you're actually able to do a lot of that without requiring the old traditional infrastructure methods. So that's one sort of tip. Ben?
Yeah, and I think, well, the one of the things for me, you know, when we've you know, done this before, I spend most of my time working with the executives, getting the sponsorship, getting the buy-in, and one of the things for us that we found was it was really important that you did have the executive sponsorship and understanding, you know, their support and their role in this. And then the other thing is, it doesn't take an army of people to actually deliver this. What we continually, when we speak with people out in the industry, you hear a lot of people thinking you have to build a team, spend millions of dollars, and you make a huge investment. And as Carlos said, you know, you start small. And what we try and say is get that enthusiasm within the organization. And I always start off with a few stories, Kim. You know, I say, hey, would you love a day where you never have to enter your username and passwords any longer? What about a day where you never need to VPN in? Or could you imagine never having to change your passwords every 90 days? And everyone's like, oh yeah, we'd love that. And it's like, well, could you imagine that being real in 5 months? Because we know we have the ability to deliver that. Carlos and I have got the experience where we have delivered it in months and not years. And I think the one thing when you talk to the CIO, the CIO conversation is different from the CSO conversation, because we love to say to the CIO, these are the benefits for your workforce and your experience there. Even things like reducing service desk tickets related to password changes. And then on the CSO front, or the security team, you can turn around and say, hey, would you like users to not enter their passwords again, but yet in the background do continuous authentication? Would you like it so that, you know, you almost eliminate lateral movement? And also, you know, when you're thinking of your network security and your segmentation, would you like to simplify that? And you know, VPN in today, you know, when most VPNs, when companies build them, they give their full-time employees broad access to the network as opposed to just that one application. So we're taking it away from being an open network VPN scenario to something which is really nice and tight and controlled.
So when you go in and you're talking to the CIO or the CISO and you're trying to implement a product that's going to, you know, keep their security posture safer, how are you working with them to train the users to follow the rules that most of, because there's always one or two bad apples in every organization that can take down the whole company. So what's your stance? Where do you come in with that?
Yeah, so the great thing there is you don't have to train your users to enter their passwords less, and you don't have to train their users to not have to use VPN. So that's a great thing, right? So there's a really low friction deployment, and it's a low risk. You know, we in both scenarios we found that we actually could under communicate the transition and the change because it was pretty seamless to the workforce. But one of the things when you start implementing zero trust the way that we've done it is we get a position where you now decide if you want to enable the posture check to prevent the access to an application, in which case you do need a good platform that gives a user some acknowledgement back and make it self-service for them to remediate. So to your point, Kim, if they've not patched their device and we want that device to be patched before you allow the access to the application, we have the ability to be notifying the user that that's where they're not meeting the requirement, and then how do they remediate that so that they can do that themselves without calling IT, because you don't want, you want that to be self-service. You don't want that to be a cost burden on IT. When you start to share this with the CIO, for example, you can turn around and say, look, here's the financial benefits. And everybody understands there is a cost to password related changes at the service desk, and it's a friction for your users. So if I turn around and said, wait a minute, we can reduce password related tickets by 60 or 80%, is that of interest? Instantly, the CIO likes that number, right? They like to see that, because password related changes are usually in the top 10 count of service desk tickets. So things like that, it is a conversation where you get to kind of share, three big benefits with the CIO and three big security benefits. So it's really cool. Very rarely in your career do you get a chance to lead a project where you improve the workforce experience while improving security. And the zero trust implementation, that's exactly what you get.
So I have a question coming more from, I have a really great relationship with many, many great CISOs in the industry, because I'm not trying to sell them anything. They're invited to be speakers on my shows, and it's just great that I don't have to sell them anything, because it's a tough world out there trying to get in front of a CISO. And you see many, I've seen over the holidays, many prominent CISOs posting things on LinkedIn, yelling at salespeople, stop booking calendar invites on my calendar and blah, blah, blah. How do you, it must be such a tough world when you have such a strong message that you want to deliver to these, C-level executives. How do you compete with your competitors to get in with them? I know you have your sales team and that's what their job is supposed to be, but what challenges are you seeing with that?
One of the things that I know and you're right, Kim, there's a lot of noise out there, right? That's the reality is zero trust is something that's used everywhere. And you're also right that, that's not, we don't hold that burden necessarily, but what we've done is we like to get out there, and we have in meetups or just different peer groups where we try not to touch on the actual product or solution. And what we've done is we've gone in and talk about, just like we're doing here, about approaches, what's worked, what hasn't. And I think for us, everyone that we're talking to is just interested, just generally want to know what's worked on your end from a communication standpoint, and what tactics were really helpful for ensuring that there's an uptick in adoption, or when do you start enforcing access to certain resources, etc. So on our end, and then maybe you can provide some additional context. But I mean, I have not seen anybody sort of turn us down, when we've been discussing more from a practitioner approach on the methods for adoption. That's
I was.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Carlos, I was just thinking, first of all, Kim, I'm really surprised, because I thought not every competitor has a Den and Carlos. I mean, I was just thinking, I'm like, is that not the magic secret sauce here? Jeez, I mean, you got Den and Carlos show, come on. And then in all seriousness, I think it's one of the unique things about Banyan, which really was exciting for us when we joined, was they actually have a free Teams edition. So, I always had an aversion for salespeople, and I apologize up front for any sales people watching or listening today. But you don't want to have to call a salesperson in order to find out if the secret sauce actually works. So the cool thing about Banyan is we've actually got a Teams edition. You don't need to call us. You can just go online. You can get up and running in 15 minutes, and you can see it work. So I think of one of the differentiators we have is really our speed of deployment. And you don't need to talk to us and speak to us about it. You can actually try it for yourself, and we will not bug you because you tried it, right? So I think that's really, really cool. And then they have a Den and Carlos team, which very few of our competitors actually have.
Well, there's only one Den and Carlos, so there you go. But it is just because I do deal with hundreds and hundreds of sponsors, and that's what makes I love our sponsors. But everyone's great, and it's just such a competitive world. And I think that there is a certain due diligence that the chief security officers have to do by looking at all different types of products and services that are out there. But I can see how they can be so overwhelmed because there is so much out there. So what are, going back to some of the tips and tricks and lessons learned, have there been some lessons learned that you sit down and have discussions with the CISO about, this is what we were doing before, what do we need to do now? What lessons have we learned from what we did wrong, and what can we do right?
I'd say, some of the pitfalls that I know we've run into have been things like going out and using the right terms, even to sort of get your users to adopt. So using the term zero trust as an example for your user base, right, has been negatively received. And so you can use other sort of terms to say, hey, if you want borderless, frictionless access, this is a new method of getting out there. So small things from like changing that conversation or focusing on the conversation and selling and upselling the benefits to your users as you're deploying is one thing. Another is really not relying on a single vendor to do it all. I know vendors will sort of sell that, they can do the identity, the endpoint management, and all these other functions. The reality is enterprises want to integrate. They want best in breed, and they want all these components to work together. And so really not budging from that, right? If you have an identity solution that you're using and you're happy with, really resisting the need to like move and transition for this zero trust initiative. So those are, I know for me, are two sort of things that I always tell people is make sure that when you're communicating out to your users, that you have a crisp message and to leadership as well. And then the other thing is like, hey, make sure that the product you do select integrates.
Yeah, it's one thing, Kim, so as Carlos mentioned, you've got existing investments, and it's really, really important that you don't have the executives in the company think that they have to go and buy and invest and throw away their existing investments. So the important piece of this is when you're looking at solutions, you look for solutions that integrate really well with the existing investments you have. Because ultimately, you do want best of breed. Well, some people want suites, but in my experience, best of breed when you're talking about something like this is really, really important. And then ultimately, don't leave with the impression that you need to rip out your VPN. I've never used that as an excuse or a justification for the zero trust programs that we've led before to say we're going to get rid of VPN. You're more than welcome to look at your VPN options, but I think what really happens over time is your VPN usage starts to reduce, And what is important for us, and one of the lessons learned, was we struggled in both cases to understand which applications were the heaviest hitting applications via VPN that we then say, let's zero trust enable those. So that getting that information and transparency into that journey, we managed it, but it took a lot of work for us and a lot of heavy lifting to do that. And then I'll close off with, you don't need a big team. The existing people that look after the existing things, like the identity stack or the endpoint security stuff, or the MDM, these are the same people that are going to participate in your zero trust effort. So you don't have to build a huge team in order to get good results.
So what do you think, we've been 2 years in, almost 2 years in this COVID world that we live in. We started seeing people starting to go back to work, and now, companies are going back remote again. So what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that the CISOs, what do you think they're going through right now with all these changes of people coming back to work and then suddenly they're back home? So again, what advice are you giving to them, and how are you staying ahead of that curve of all these changes? And something bad can happen because once again, here we are quickly going back home again.
Yeah, so I'd love to start by saying, everyone's been home and they're on their home networks, and the quality and the security of home networks varies. So the risk is that you may have infection on your device, or you might bring something bad into the office network. And because most office networks are wide open networks, so once you get in, you think you're safe because you're in your corporate network. Then if there is anyone with a compromised device or malware, then those bad actors will start to spread really quick. So for me, the ability to turn your corporate network into a guest network where all you can do is get to the internet, I think that is a really compelling story for any zero trust, endeavor. And so I think that's a huge one. That's why knowing the posture of the device and the visibility into what they're accessing, and then getting that network so that you can have a huge, big, wide open, office network. That's for me is really important this year as we're starting to transition back in and back out and back in, and hopefully everyone gets to return to work soon.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, that's exactly what we're hearing from folks. And as we discuss, what the long-term sort of plan is I think everyone's in agreement that we're moving towards this hybrid world, right? Where and simplifying the corporate network is something that I know a lot of folks have discussed. So yeah, came back to your earlier point. I think that is like, what does the future look like? I think it's that hybrid world, and how do you simplify your corporate network so you can apply some of the same principles.
And things just come out of nowhere. For example, we did a wrap-up event in 2021 in Atlanta. It was the perfect storm, Omicron and then Log4j, and all of a sudden we're trying to get these people to come back out. What impact do you think Log4j is now going to leave with, again, going back to zero trust, and what can people do that just seems like a mess, and I can't really wrap my head around the whole Log4j thing, but you guys are the experts on that.
Yeah, I think, from a networking perspective, making sure, your egress and the access to these systems internally, that you really got that choke point, and you can, try and block things there. Ultimately, it's really about developers and instant responders. My hat's off to those people who work tirelessly over the break, because they're going to spend a lot of time trying to identify code in older systems, and how do you protect those things is a challenge, I think, that's going to be around for a long time.
Carlos, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to.
Yeah, exactly what Dan said, right? We are not obviously not out of the woods yet. Just people are this is going to have a long-term effect for folks, patching and whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely something that changes, the view will change the view on like moving forward. How do you quickly assess and determine how the impact in your organization? But
Yeah.
yeah, this will have
And
far more
one
effect.
yeah, sorry, one thing I want to make sure, Kim, I'm clear on is Banyan, from our perspective, we have no impact with Log4j. Luckily enough, our founders, one of our co-founders, made great decisions early on with the technology stack that we use. So lucky for me and our team that day, we looked internally and there was nothing to find. It's not in our stack, so we were pretty delighted by that outcome.
We have a really great, it's on our YouTube channel at FutureCon events. And our last wrap up, we had James Azar, who is from the Cyber Hub podcast, and we had Homeland Security there. We had a lot of government sector sitting on a panel, and it was right when Log4j came out, and they did an hour talk about it. And one of the things James said is, as cybersecurity practitioners, we're like retail workers at Christmas now. All of a sudden something hits us and we're working hourlessly and we get our time off. Well, I don't know when they ever get their time off, but I definitely, that was a bummer for all those people that had to work through the holidays and are still working. So anyway, I had to talk a little bit of Log4j because it's still out there and it's still keeping people hands down 24/7. So, but going back over to Zero Trust, can you kind of tell us, going back to some of those examples and some of the things that Banyan Security is doing when you go into a company, and how would they even get started with, if they're already into something with a different vendor? And, I kind of feel like a lot of people, if it's not working, if it's working, don't fix it. So how do you get them to, that scare factor of, hey, things could change tomorrow, you better protect yourself?
Yeah. So what I can tell you is that, for organizations and practitioners, we all know the end state of where we want to be. It's that transition that is critical, right? It's everything. And having the tools that allow you to sort of iterate, and I mentioned this earlier, is you find a use case and then you gradually start expanding, and having the tools that enable that is key. And in particular, Banyan Security does offer what I feel, and was one of the reasons why at Adobe selected Banyan, is because of the versatility, all the different tools that enable you to get started with things like a service tunnel, where you can have the ability to allow access. And as you gain visibility, then you apply these very granular policies that apply zero trust principles. So it's all about, again, finding that versatility, having the different capabilities to enable you to transition to that end state.
Yeah, and I would say, Kim, it's really interesting. We were fortunate that we ran the identity stack, so for the workforce authentication, and it was pretty easy for us to insert into that workflow of the authentication the posture check to ensure that we would, as you're authenticating to those apps, we can check the device posture. And this is one of the cool things, is if you can sit there and say, I want to just pilot this in a small environment, you can see it working, then that's a really easy way to get up and running. And people don't realize, it is actually pretty simple to get started, provided you have the flexibility within your identity stack.
Well, can you tell me, there are I've had a couple of people on the show that have, they're trying to completely go to zero passwords, no passwords, but I think it's a little different from what you guys are doing. They're, how are you guys implementing that? I mean, I would love, just for example, this show right now, I hadn't been on my radio show computer for a month. It took me 20 minutes because I couldn't remember my password that I put in a month ago. So I had to reset everything, and it was annoying, and I'm just one person. So what are you doing for people to, how are you implementing that into corporations?
Yeah, so Banyan, and there's, the solutions vary out there, but Banyan will deploy as part of the registration process, an ability to establish the identity of that user, and additionally the device through use of certificates. So we're able to securely not just distribute, but also manage the whole life cycle, so that we're reducing that need for you, as an example, to be presented with your username and password. And so that is how we're doing it today with the Banyan solution, and it's great, right? People are not getting the continual prompt to enter their credentials plus MFA, and rinse and repeat, and it's been really, really popular. I think people are like, give me more of this. That's one of the constant, I would say, at Adobe and Cisco, was one of the top three items. Well, it was one of the top three items that we would never get away with, was like, why am I being prompted so often as I access the SaaS and on-prem resources?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the identity game since the mid '90s, Kim, right? So when people started to talk years ago about single sign-on, it was always one of those terms that made me feel sick, because you're not single signing on. Really, what happened for so many years in the industry was you'd log into your laptop or your computer, and then you'd start logging into applications and services. And if the application team didn't partner with the identity team into your single sign-on platform of choice, then the users would have to log into that specific application again. So the reality is usernames and passwords, it's not that they don't exist any longer, but what you're really trying to do is have them be in the background, so the users don't see or are prompted to enter a username and password. But if you look at the industry and just where the industry is going, we've not eliminated the username and password. We've just made it less relevant, and ideally less in the face of the user. And I will always tell people, it's not about single sign-on. I think of it as dynamic authentication. Like, we might want you to step up depending on the context of the user, the device. We try and also have you log in less or see an authentication prompt less, because we've got a better trust with the user and the device context. So for me, it's really, it's a very fun time in the industry right now, because we're getting to a position where most of the vendors out there, including the OS and hardware manufacturers, they are doing things that are leveraging, your biometrics and things of that more, your passwords less. And it's a fun time to be in this space.
I have Manuel Salas. He is one of our LinkedIn listeners. Thanks. That our LinkedIn listeners have been super quiet today. We have a lot of them out there. He said, did Mr. Jones work for Adobe as well? And he did. And he said he looks familiar. So I'm not certain, Dan, if you have anything to say on that.
Man, well, I do look familiar. I mean, I look like very many famous actors out there. So if you watch some good movies, I'm sure they've used my face in many of them, I guess. But yeah, nice to see you, Manuel. Thanks
Yeah.
for checking in.
So is there a certain, and he said, hi, Carlos. So maybe.
Hello, sir.
Anyway, is there a certain industry sector that you guys are better for, or is it everyone your customer, or what are you guys doing with the industry?
Yeah, no, there is no particular vertical that I would say would be more interested than others. We actually have customers across the board, and so really everyone is looking, I would say, at applying zero trust principles in different use cases. Some development heavy organizations, or just folks that really have just a need to get out there and secure some web applications for productivity apps. And so I think for anyone that as far as the customers that I've engaged with, it just varies across the board. So I wouldn't say that one sort of vertical or industry would be more interested, and that's certainly not what I've seen.
Den, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Because I'm primarily asking that because I'm interested in banks, and especially when they're doing MFA and stuff like that. How are you working with banks?
Yeah, and I think it's, as Carlos said, there's not one specific vertical, but in the banks, specifically, I don't know as much about our customers as Carlos does, because he's heavily involved with our customers and the customer success team. But I think of it like banks or the financial sector. MFA is vitally important to everything that they're doing. I'm a banking customer, right? So I would hate to think of my banking systems or the privileged people that run the systems in the banks. I'd hate to think of them not using multi-factor. I would love to think of them as being a zero trust implementation, because it's vitally important that, especially the people that run those systems, that they're at least looking at the posture check of the devices they're coming from. And I think the whole industries, so if I just generalize it a little bit, if you think of something like ransomware, like we have the ability with a good zero trust implementation to almost eliminate ransomware spreading across your organization. So I look at banks and other sectors and just say, look, there's not one magic sector, Kim, but we have the ability to, via zero trust, a good implementation, to really combat some of the threats that we're facing right now.
Manuel's still out there. I think he's a jokester out there. He said that he lives in San Jose and you guys used to come and get coffee from him. So
yeah, I think we certainly did use that Starbucks at Park Plaza, because it was right across from the Adobe Towers. And Carlos and I, every now and again, you need to leave the office and get some caffeine.
And then Eddie Royal from Dallas. Thanks, Eddie, for chiming in today. This is going to happen. We have about 5 minutes left, and then we're going to start getting people asking us questions right when we're at the end of the show. Everyone's still quiet. I guess they're trying to wake up from New Year's Eve, right? Anyway, yes. So we are we're coming towards the top of the hour, so we still have about 4 minutes left. But let me turn it over to you guys and have you both talk a minute about, each of you talk a minute about some of the tips, tricks, lessons learned, your advice of how to make 2022 a more secure year, so these corporations aren't spending 24/7 trying to fix some sort of ransomware, anything that could possibly happen.
Yeah, so I would say again, find that use case in your organization to get started in your zero trust journey. Does not have to, impact the entire company, and so really just focus on that one use case. Gain experience and expand. And as Dan pointed out, if you are looking to just kick the tires, just kind of understand, how a product, the Zero Trust Network Access product works, or just want to, without any, sort of commitments, go to banyonsecurity.io, try out the Team Edition, and you can get started really, really quickly.
Yeah, Kim, I think the thing I'd love to leave everyone with is, with a good zero trust implementation, you can certainly secure and protect your environments a lot more, right? That's pretty easy to take away. And then the other thing is, if you're really struggling to get started, come up with a plan, but then also, hey, reach out to myself if you ever want to hear our stories and even have us, talk about your environment. We're not the sales team, so I'm not trying to sell. I'm not motivated or commissioned by selling, but I am certainly, as a practitioner, really excited to meet other practitioners and help however we can.
Are you guys excited to get back out there in person? And I know you're going to be live at our Dallas event on January 20th. How excited are you, and how encouraging are you to people to come back out in person?
Yeah, I mean, hey, we are super excited about the event. We booked our flights and hotels weeks ago, and we can't wait to get there. We'd hope we'll see many people out there, and then certainly, ideally, we can talk some tech and talk about how people can get started.
Absolutely. Yes. Can't wait. My wife can't wait to get me out of the house either. So.
Well, good for you guys that you booked your hotel and flight, because I'm running the event and I haven't done that yet. So I better do that when we get off this show. But guys, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. I look forward to seeing you guys out in Dallas, Texas, and then you're going to be in Los Angeles. The Super Bowl just moved out of Los Angeles, so let's hope we're going to see each other in Los Angeles. I'm not hanging my hat up yet, so I'm planning on having that event. But thanks again, guys. Carlos Martinez and Den Jones from Banyan Security. Thank you so much for spending this past hour on And Security for All. Super excited for next week. I have Tina Piccioni. She is one of the greatest speakers I've ever had. So on one of my shows, she is now working for Google. Let me get it correct. She's working for Google Cloud. She took that position last year. So make sure you guys tune in next week, because we are going to have a great conversation with Tina Piccioni. Thanks again, everyone. You guys, Happy New Year again. Thanks for tuning in, and check us out at futureconevents.com, and we will see you next week. Stay safe, stay secure. Have a good weekend.